Now, I want to propose something that is probably new to you, but certainly isn't new to the Bible. Yeshua is speaking of his assembly, and this may seem like a new initiative, yet it was anything but. Two kingdoms, one crown. In 1469, Spain wasn't exactly Spain yet. It was multiple kingdoms all vying for power and territory. And the kingdom of Castile, ruled by Isabella I, and the kingdom of Aragon, ruled by Ferdinand II, don't get that confused with Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings. Different political systems here, different interests, sometimes aligned and sometimes not, and certainly not united, right? They had separate crowns, separate laws, and separate governing structures. But then Ferdinand and Isabella were joined in holy matrimony. Now, perhaps they were in love, maybe they weren't, I don't know, I couldn't tell you. But something then unusual happened is that they ruled side by side, not one absorbing the other, not one replacing the other, but sharing rule over distinct territories and identities. And after the marriage, Castile remained Castile. Aragon remained Aragon. But they were bound together in this unique unity, this unique assembly. Now, I'm sure I'm missing some details, and I doubt it was as seamless as a history as sometimes history likes to write itself to be, right? But the core example here remains intact. Two heirs to royalty, united as one, keeping their distinctions, retaining their unique identities, but ruling together side by side. In Matthew chapter 16, a question of identity is asked of Yeshua's disciples. And when Yeshua says, "Who do you say that I am?" And there's a discussion that ensues. But Peter eventually replies, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Yeshua answered to him, saying, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." No, the text does not say that. The Greek says ekklesia. On this rock, meaning the statement that he said, "I am the Messiah, Son of the living God, I will build my assembly, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." Now, I want to propose something that is probably new to you, but certainly isn't new to the Bible. Yeshua is speaking of his assembly, and this may seem like a new initiative, yet it was anything but. Okay, defining assembly of Messiah, aka the church. I started with a slide, I ended with a slide in the episode on the nations, defining the nations. And I want to start with that slide again, but then we're going to talk about how we know that slide to be true, okay? That diagram. So first of all, if you haven't gotten a copy of The Rooted Kingdom yet, you need to go get a copy of this. Everything that I'm talking about on the Rooted Kingdom podcast itself and all the things that we're going through, most of those are going to be found, at least the definitions thereof, in the Rooted Kingdom book, Solving the Riddle of Israel, the Church, and the Kingdom, by myself, David Halevi, and Nicholas, aka Cole Morganti, and he's going to be on the show as well, just kind of popping in and out as we go along with different topics. But let's go to this, talk about the assembly of Messiah. And because I think this is probably in the church itself, in the ecclesia. I don't even like the term church because the term church is such a misleading term. We're going to do a whole nother episode on just the term church and where it came from. But what we really want to define is what is the ecclesia. And that is what term is used in the New Testament to describe the unity of believers, aka the body of Messiah, the keilah, okay, in Hebrew, what we say, the congregation, the assembly. And this is what I brought. This is a slide that I put forth in the previous episode about, these aren't linear. You can click on these episodes however you want to, but I would encourage you after this after you're done watching this, to go back and watch the nation episode on nations, national identity. What does it mean to be of the nations? And of course, Devil's Delusion, which talks about the true identity and definition of the nation of Israel. All of these are central to your understanding of the Bible and what God has done, is doing, and will do on the earth. So this is reality, what we're looking at right now. And that you have the nation of Israel, you have nations of the world, and out of those two parties, we have what's called the remnant of Israel, which is Israelite followers of Yeshua, and the I guess you could call them a remnant, even though the scripture doesn't call them that way, but it is. It's a remnant or a section of people from the nations that also follow Yeshua as Messiah and their Savior. And we are united in one body called the ecclesia. Yet we keep our distinctions, okay? And why I started with this story of Ferdinand and Isabella, and, look, every story and analogy is going to break down somewhere, but it just kind of helps you start thinking in a different way than perhaps you were thinking before. And in Matthew chapter 16, itchy, we first see one of only two instances where Yeshua uses this term assembly. Okay, one is in 16, one is in 18. So let's stop for just a second before I can get a little bit ahead of myself, and let's go here. Ekklesia, again, ekklesia means assembly, and it means, in context, it means assembly, so what does that mean? It means it can be a secular assembly, as it's used as for a riotous mob. In Acts, when Paul goes to Ephesus to preach the gospel, there's a riotous mob that comes out into public, and that's called an ecclesia. Okay, not the quote church, right? So in context, you have to understand that that determines what the definition of a word means. What does it mean in context? So even when Yeshua uses it in Matthew 16. Verse 18, and also in Matthew 18, verse 17. Here's two instances, only two times that we see this word used by him. Yet only one of these is actually referring to what I would argue is the, quote, assembly of Messiah, and that's because he specifically says it. I'm not going to go into the Matthew 18 passage, but basically that's talking about a local synagogue scenario of that time and place. So it was well before the unity or the unification of the entire world under the salvation of Yeshua happened, which happened obviously at his resurrection, but then we became aware of that in Acts chapter 2. So in the Greek, there is something the Greek lexicon is called the LXX, okay? And we see ekklesia being used in the not lexicon. My nose is so itchy right now, it's like distracting me. You ever have that? So in the Greek Septuagint, known as the LXX, we have the term ekklesia used, and it's used in place of a Hebrew word, kahal. Okay, so in biblical Hebrew, the term kahal means congregation, and so the Jewish scribes of the Septuagint used the Greek word ekklesia to replace that word kahal in Hebrew. All right. Yeah. Okay. Enough said. So when we see that in the Hebrew, most of the time, we're going to see congregation with kahal Yehovah, or the congregation of the Lord. All right. Israel is known as the congregation of the Lord. All right. Because they were assembly of the Lord. But we also see this terminology, kahal Yehovah, congregation of Jehovah, congregation of the Lord, when it refers to Israel and sojourners, meaning foreigners who are with the nation of Israel as they come out of Egypt, as they enter the land, all right? And that term is gerim, okay? Gerim in the Hebrew. And so really important is to understand some terminology here as we move forward. So what I want to propose here is a concept that you've probably never heard before, yet it's ubiquitous. Like, this is what we see in the Bible. It's the kahal Yehovah. Okay. Now, in Exodus 12, 48 through 49, we see nation of Israel and sojourners, like I said, Garim, united together under the law of Moses. Now, some nations couldn't be a part of this assembly or this Kahal Yehovah. Some nations are excluded altogether. You can read about that in Deuteronomy 23:3. Some are allowed, but only under specific conditions. We also read about that in Deuteronomy chapter 23. And if you were allowed to sojourn as a foreigner, that is to live alongside, that's the kind of the uniqueness of the term. You had to be circumcised. You had to obey the law of Moses. So you had to take the law upon yourself. Yet you were still separate in the temple system. Very important to understand this. The nations who wanted to live alongside Israel so that they could also participate in the worship of the God of all things, Creator, the God of Israel, they were allowed, but only to a certain point. So we see later that in the temple system, in the temple complex, you had a court of Hagoim, the nations, a court of the Gentiles. And this was a dividing wall that separated the Gentile followers of the God of Israel from the Israelite followers of the God of Israel, because they did not have to take upon themselves the fullness of all of the things about the law that Israelites did. All right. Now, some of the things they did, obviously, circumcision, all these things, but they were still considered foreigners. They were still considered Garim in the Hebrew, okay? They're never called Israelites. So there's a wall of separation. Now, you might recall, Paul talks about this, which we're going to get to here in just a little bit. Okay. So, very clear about this as well. This is not simply the, quote, church in the Old Testament. The congregation of Jehovah, the Kahal Yehovah, okay, is not simply the, quote, church in the Hebrew Bible or in the Old Testament, all right? This is not the same thing at all. We're simply seeing the term ecclesia used as congregation. When we look at the identity and the definition of what that congregation is, we see that it's a unique assembly which allows Gentiles to come in and worship alongside Israel, yet they do not become Israel. But it's an imperfect union because there are still walls of separation between the two, both physically and figuratively speaking, okay? Very important to understand that. So, what brings us to the Matthew passage is once we understand that in Jeremiah 23:5 and 6, and as you study who the Messiah will be, all right, now we could go to Micah 5:1 in the Hebrew Bible, 5:2 in the English Bible. We could go to passages in Isaiah 7 and 9. We can go to passages in Daniel. We can go to passages like Isaiah 48, 12 through 16. There's all these passages that talk about the unity of the Godhead of Israel and also the divine nature of a single human being coming out of Israel from the line of Judah, a son of David that will be the suffering servant, Isaiah 52 to 53, and redeemer of not only Israel, but also the nations. This is where we get the messianic hope, okay? Now, obviously, I'm going to argue that Yeshua fulfills that messianic hope in his perfect timing, death, resurrection, all those things, okay? I'm getting beyond the scope here, but what I want you to focus on is the terminology about the coming Messiah, okay? Jeremiah 23:5 and 6, we see the righteous branch. Now, everyone recognizes, Jew or Gentile here, whether you're a Hebraic, Orthodox Jewish scholar, or a Christian theologian. Everyone recognizes that the righteous branch here is the Messiah, okay? There's a theme that runs throughout the Hebrew Bible of tzemach or netzer, a shoot or a branch, okay? And so that is a messianic identifier. It's almost like, what's it called? I can't remember. Okay, so let's move forward here. The righteous branch is called Yehovah Tzidkenu, okay? A human being in this passage is called Jehovah our righteousness. It says, and he will be called Yehovah Tzidkenu, Jehovah our righteousness. That's who the Messiah is. He's literally given the divine name. Okay? And what do we have in the Hebrew Bible over and over again? A description of what? The Kahal Yehovah, the assembly of Jehovah. So the Messiah will be Jehovah our righteousness. And in the Hebrew Bible, we see this description of the unification of the world in this small, unique way during the time of Israel, the Israelite wanderings, and also the kingdom of Israel and all the other shapes and forms that she takes as a nation under the temple system, under the Mosaic law, of foreigners sojourning with Israel in something called the Kahal Yehovah, the assembly of the Lord. Are you making the connections yet to Matthew 16? All right. Matthew 16:18. And also I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock, the statement that he had made, which was, you are Messiah, son of the living God, I will build my ecclesia, my assembly. So the Messiah, who is Yeshua, who is Jehovah our righteousness, it's Jehovah's assembly. Okay, do you see what's going on here? Yeshua's assembly, the Messianic assembly, however, is different than the one that came before that. But they don't really get it yet. All right? They don't really get it until later after the resurrection, as we're going to see in Acts. Okay? So what I want to present here is that my assembly does not appear in a vacuum. Yeshua, the physical embodiment of Jehovah, was creating a new assembly, perfecting what he had shepherded out of Egypt into an assembly without borders, Ephesians 2. Without borders, the dividing wall has been taken down, as Paul uniquely informs his audience at Ephesus. And by the way, brief caveat here, go read the book of Acts. Paul goes to Ephesus twice, and in each time he goes to the Jewish population first, as was his custom throughout the entire book of Acts. The apostle to the Gentiles, right? But yet he goes to the Jew first. Whole other subject, which we're going to cover in a different episode, but it's really, really interesting. But my point is, this is certainly a mixed audience. All right. We know that many Jews believed and came to faith in Yeshua as Messiah, and then Gentiles did as well. So Paul is needing to address these growing pains, if you will, with that and other assemblies. Of course, the entire book of Romans is really written to a mixed population, specifically addressing Jews, then Gentiles, then Jews again, then Gentiles again throughout the book. So in Acts chapter 10, this is really fascinating. All right. Really, really fascinating. Remember the damsel being rescued, right? So now what? The damsel nations have been rescued by the Messiah, okay, through the vehicle, the trusty steed who is Israel, okay? Acts 10 and 11, Peter's vision and Cornelius receives the Holy Spirit. So in Acts chapters 10 and 11, what happens? Peter is given a vision, rise, kill, and eat. What is he supposed to rise, kill, and eat? Non-kosher food. And he as a Jew is like, this is not cool. Like, I don't know. I don't understand this. I don't get this, right? But the purpose was because Cornelius had come to faith in Yeshua. And God wanted Peter to go to him and disciple him and basically help him out. Like, okay, it's like bring him into the fold, right? And so all this happens, and then this sparks a big debate. So in Acts 15, we get something called the Jerusalem Council. The question is, do Gentiles, which are people from the nations sojourning, gerim, with Israel, right? Do they have to follow the law to sojourn with Israel and receive salvation through the Messiah? Now, a lot of people will look at this from some outside false perspective of the Judaizers of Galatians, which, by the way, the text never uses that term. That's an invented term, okay? This isn't, quote, Judaizers, all right? We should not mock their confusion here, all right? The Jewish confusion, Israelite confusion. Why? Because they were simply going by what the Torah specifically told them up until Peter's vision. The status quo for Israel was, look, yeah, Gentiles can come and sojourn with us, but they got to be circumcised. They take upon the law. And if they do that, they can come into the temple system. But even then, there's a dividing wall, so they have to stay in the court of the Gentiles. The list goes on. So it wasn't true unity under the Mosaic law. But now that this new covenant has come and a perfect price has been paid for all of humanity's sin, now Gentiles are able to associate, and vice versa. Israelites are able to associate and fellowship with Gentiles. So it's a two-way street here. They are unified under the blood of Messiah. And so Gentiles no longer have to take upon the law to fellowship with their Israelite brethren, even the ones that were wanting to worship the God of Israel and pay homage and give sacrifices and offerings. So we can't mock them because they're simply going based upon what God had commanded them under the Sinai covenant, under the Mosaic law and the Torah. Think about this. How many problems does this immediately solve in your own mind, in your own Bible study of Jews and Gentiles together in one assembly? Israel and the nations together in one assembly, like, but also not like what it was in the wilderness and under the temple system in the land of Israel, because now it's perfected. So Yeshua's assembly is a perfected version of the Kahal Yehovah, because his Kahal, his assembly, his ecclesia still keeps the identities of both Israel and the nations, the way he created them in their unique identity. Promises to Israel are still to Israel. The grafting in of the Gentiles is now possible in this amazing way, and they can share in the household of God as equal members with Israel, yet they don't become Israelites, but they get all the blessings of salvation of Israel's Messiah. So that's what Peter then in verses 8 and 9 says, we shall be saved in the same manner as they, meaning Gentiles. So that's what it's all surrounding. It's not whether they have to do the law to be, quote, Christians. That is not the discussion. The discussion is, do they have to take upon the law to sojourn with us, because that's the way it's always been, in order to receive salvation through the Messiah? And their conclusion is no. Now, they do give them some things. They can't eat meat that's been strangled or sacrificed to idols. There's still some things there. So there are still Gentiles on this earth, right? Members of the nations that live in cultures that strangle the animal, that sacrifice meat to idols. This still happens. And so if for some reason you're in one of those countries, whether that be Africa or Eastern Asia, or where these things take place, you have to be aware of that. All right? Because there are still stipulations that you can't participate in. Stipulations, practices, that's the term. So, I already covered this. The damsel grafted in here. Here's some takeaways for you guys. So Israel's identity determines how we study Scripture. I hope this is becoming really clear. If we get it wrong, we get the Bible wrong. Nations, Gentiles. Again, not a dirty word. You have an extremely high calling, as we talked about in the video where we discover your identity as the nations and what that means. Are you doing what your calling is? Are you prepared? Are you being a good example to share the Jewish Messiah with Israel, with the Jewish people? That's the most Jewish thing a person can do, is follow the Jewish Messiah. So again, if you're a Jewish person who doesn't believe the way that I do is regarding who the Messiah is, that's fine. Let's have that discussion. But I think we would both agree that the most Jewish thing you could do is accept the Messiah, whoever that is, whenever he comes. So I want you to imagine the clarity of these definitions of Israel and the nations and the assembly of Messiah are going to bring to your personal Bible study. This should really begin to clear up massive things, okay? So, because, again, the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable, therefore the promise he has made to you, the nations, in his blood is also irrevocable. Friends, I imagine this was new. So go back through. Don't take my word for it. Go back through and study these things. You can scroll back and look at these references. Go and check them out for yourselves. What I hope you're beginning to see and why we wrote the book, The Rooted Kingdom, and why there is so much confusion within the world today on Israel and rise of anti-Semitism and Zionism and all these things, is because, correct me if I'm wrong, is anybody actually taking the time to sit and say, what do these terms even mean? The identity of Israel, what does that even mean? Goys, what does that even mean? The church. People have an assumption that they automatically know what the church is because they're a Christian, but they don't, because they miss all this stuff. They don't understand how Israel is right alongside them. And, this struck me earlier as I'm going through this, a modern moment, if you will, in this, at the end of this episode here. But I want you to think about this. And this is off the top of my head, so hopefully this comes out right. But Yeshua talks about when he's being accused of doing works of the devil. He says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And right now, the house of the ecclesia, or the assembly, if you want to call it the church, fine, is actively, in many circles, persecuting and blaming the Jewish people in ways that Nazi Germany did, in ways that the Crusaders did, in ways that the Catholic Church under the Inquisition did, in awful, awful blood libel ways. Not understanding that there is no assembly without believing Israel. There is no assembly of Messiah without the remnant of Israel, Jewish followers of Yeshua, alongside you in that unity. Think about that. So right now, we have a house divided against itself, one side attacking the other side, and the side that it's attacking, the Israelite side, the believing Israel side, they don't even know that that's part of their own house. No wonder they're confused. No wonder they've fallen for the devil's delusion. And it's tragic. It is tragic. And Paul warns about this. Look, I don't know. I don't claim to know, and I haven't really seen any. I think it's a big debate. What does it mean for the warning that if Gentiles are proud and they don't fear God, they too will be cut off if they're prideful against the natural branches, which is Israel? And true Israel, but they're being believing Israel, the remnant of Israel. What does it mean to be cut off? This is a big discussion. Whatever it means, okay, can't be good. I think we can all agree it's not good. I don't want to be cut off. Everyone, particularly the Gentile world, again, I'm using Gentile just meaning not Israel. The Gentile portion of the assembly of Messiah often points out the broken off branches of Israel. See, you're long gone. You're past. You're no more. And it's like they stop reading and only zone in on what makes them feel good. And why would that even make you feel good? How tragic is that? All the while not recognizing that they're the Gentile, and catch this, the church is not grafted into the olive tree of Israel, believing Israel. The Gentiles are grafted in. Why? Because it's an assembly. It's the assembly of Messiah. The perfected form of the Kahal Yehovah, assembly of Jehovah, has now come in the assembly of Messiah under the new covenant, promised in Jeremiah 31:31-34 to the nation of Israel. So if you want to be part of that new covenant, if you want to be joined and brought near the commonwealth of Israel into the household of God, you have to be grafted into the root that supports you. And that root that supports you is the remnant of Israel through the Messiah, son of David. I hope this clears some things up for you. Again, Check out The Rooted Kingdom, Solving the Riddle of Israel, the Church, and the Kingdom. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. Any pushback, any questions you guys have, comment below. That's it for me, y'all. I'll see you in the next one. Love you guys. Thanks for showing up. See ya.
Barefoot I walked Jerusalem square. Blood fell on my trousers as the horses did draw near. Then gripped by fear I quickened my gait, steadily aware that I do not control my fate. So I reach out, I hold tight. Whatever comes about me will be in my Maker's sight. My Maker's sight. From the beginning cursed to toil, I rise to work anew, but my tools have all turned to spoil. Then all my vineyards did run dry, employing a man named Lucifer, trading wisdom for a lie. So I reach out, I hold tight. Whatever comes about me will be in my Maker's sight. My Maker's sight. Words drip like honey from her lips, every intimate emotion poured out from her fingertips. This siren's ring is calling loud, but I must deny myself, if only to make my Maker proud. So I reach out, I hold tight. Whatever comes about me will be in my Maker's sight. My Maker's sight.